It's been a major development on both sides of these campaigns. Um, there's been a lot of twists and turns. I think more than any other presidential election, possibly, with many monumental events, whether it be the assassination attempt or what we're going to start with is this new Kamala Harris campaign that came out of the Joe Biden campaign. So just for a little bit of a recap, I don't think many people have missed it, but just so we get our bearings a little bit. Of course, Joe Biden started off. Everybody was saying that he had his faculties, that he was good to go for another 4 years. Had a miserable debate performance, and of course, they had to. There was an emergency meeting of Democrats, and they forced him out and ended up running with Kamala Harris. Now, at the beginning, there was a large amount of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. The media gave her a lot of support. They went for even weeks, 2-3 weeks, just showering her with praise. They had admittedly, I will say, a decent outreach to youth where they ended up actually seeming fairly together. They seem to actually have rallied around Kamala Harris, and it seemed like a strong campaign effort. And for the first 2 weeks, or maybe even a month, it looked like she had a serious shot at really demolishing the Trump campaign on the other end of the aisle there. But what ended up happening was a number of just awful efforts on the part of this campaign. We saw a debate performance that wasn't exactly what she needed. We saw the hurricanes, I should say, that devastated the East Coast, and there was a number of mishaps that were done. She during this terrible natural disasters on the East Coast, decided to make a number of questionable interview decisions, going on the Call Her Daddy podcast, which is this really degenerate podcast. And it seemed very frivolous to many for her to go on that to go on that podcast. At the same time, Tim Walz gave, I think everybody can recognize now, a miserable debate performance. It wasn't on the level of Biden's debate performance, but it was still quite terrible. And coming up now to these final days, she has not done many interviews at all. If she has, it's been sort of damage control. And the last minute, we've usually in these elections, we have what's called an October surprise. And that certainly has happened here, I would say, with a gift from the person that she stole this campaign from. And this was from Joe Biden. So Joe Biden was talking about, in response to some things that were made at the Madison Square Garden rally that Donald Trump had. He said this about Trump supporters. We'll play it here.
Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico, where I'm in my home state of Delaware, they're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable, and it's un-American. It's totally contrary to everything we've done.
So there you see that he blatantly said the only garbage that he sees, and this is in response to something about Puerto Rico sort of being this garbage territory. What he said is the only thing I see that is garbage are his supporters. Now, the way they've been trying to spin this is that he meant to say is that he simply misspoke, that he meant to say his supporters' comments. But as I think anybody can hear there, it's a lot easier to see when you actually look at him and when you see him and hear him. He does not misspeak. I don't think he doesn't seem like he corrects himself instantly. He says, the only thing I see that is garbage is his supporters. He leans back and pauses and then moves on to the next sentence. And his response to the outrage about this really wasn't satisfactory. His press office seemed to say something different than what he actually said, making it seem like there was an apostrophe after the supporters. But as everybody just heard, there really was a different sentence that he started. And Kamala Harris came out on the sort of runway after coming off of her plane and said that she wants to distance herself from this, that she does not agree with those sort of comments. We saw a number of Democrats do the same thing. And I think this was a major blunder on the Democrats' part. One can even speculate that this might have been sabotaged on the part of uh, Joe Biden, but that certainly was not a good look for her. Another thing I wanted to mention is her continual alienation of young men, which are a pivotal demographic here. She's down in young black voters, young black men, and especially young white men, as there's really nothing even appealing. Tim Walz, I don't think, made a successful appeal with his sort of video game streams that he's been doing recently. That's not going to be enough for the majority of young men who are starting families or trying to get rid of this awful economy. But also, when it comes to that religious demographic, she made, I think, was a terrible blunder when asked about religious exemptions for abortion, not even IVF, which has been a controversy in the Donald Trump campaign, but for abortion, she would not take a stance on that would say, oh, no, absolutely, there should be religious exemptions. So, not if I was predicting the election that's happening next week right now, I would say that she has there's a strong likelihood that Donald Trump will win a decisive victory. I don't think she has any momentum on her side. I don't think they did a good job this October of really giving a closing message. I think it was an unsuccessful campaign and an unsuccessful rally for the Kamala Harris campaign. So I would guess it's a decisive victory. I voted myself already for Donald Trump, even though I wasn't happy with a lot of the things we saw this entire campaign. I still did vote for Donald Trump, and that's my 2 cents on what's going to happen. What's your insight into this Kamala campaign and, of course, the Trump campaign, Brian?
Yeah, and I think Las Vegas agrees with you. The betting odds are pretty heavily they're putting on in Trump's favor, so they seem to think he's going to win.
Is a very, very clear distinction between these two candidates currently running. We have one candidate who is going to protect religious freedoms, and Sister would be the first to tell you from her own example how that poured out into the medical field. Not only will that eventually have to do with things like euthanasia, not just pro-life at the prenatal end of the spectrum, but also things like euthanasia. It's going to be the next slippery slope that we have to embark upon. But things like folks who refused for religious reasons or other reasons to take the vaccine, and how that poured out with they took her medical license away for a time. So there's these ideas of religious freedoms that will be protected with President Trump. Not to mention the transgender issue, the lack of understanding the dignity of the human person in the way Christ intends, that not only respects life from birth until natural death, but everything in between, right? So it's much more than the economy, and much more than the border, and much more than the lack of wars under President Trump's presidency. But yes, a very, very clear distinction. I would say in this election, we have an incredible opportunity to limit evil. So regardless of what has been said or what folks have been thinking, and by the way, I've been hearing a lot of faithful Catholics and people of faith saying, I'm going to sit it out this election. And I just want to say we can't sit it out. We have a moral obligation to vote. The church is very clear in her teaching on our obligation, the Catholic Catechism as well. But this is an opportunity to vote to limit the evil done. So I would say we've got to get out there. We've got to vote.
President Trump has, of course, been a major figure in the past 10 years, and really for American politics, really in the entire history of this country. He's been one of the most important or crucial figures for American politics. I want to shift the topic a little bit over to him. I think a lot of people, including myself, have seen this campaign as being very distinct and different from the 2016 campaign and the 2020 campaign, even though I would say it's gotten a lot better recently in this last month or two. It has been different. It's a different tone. It's more establishment than the original 2016 and 2020 campaign. campaign was. Now, obviously, the other side is the Democratic Party, which is completely monstrous, and the Kamala Harris future administration would be a nightmare. But I think a lot of people are asking themselves, well, there seems to have been a change, and I'm wondering, have you detected a similar change in the Trump campaign's message? And do you think Catholics should be rallying around this message that this campaign is promoting?
Yeah, so it's obvious that Trump has moderated on a number of issues, and most glaringly, abortion, LGBT issues. He and his wife have supported the Log Cabin Republicans, which is a pro-LGBT organization. He's never defended in his adult life a traditional marriage. He told 60 Minutes in 2016, after he was elected, that he's fine with Obergefell and Hodges. That was a Supreme Court ruling that legalized so-called homosexual marriage. And yeah, the people he surrounded himself, I think, is a bit concerning. I will say, as you alluded to there, in recent weeks and days, especially, his messaging has gotten a lot sharper, and he's surrounded himself with people who I think are much better. I think Robert Kennedy on health issues is fantastic. I think what he's doing is great. Um, I think and again, there's obvious concerns with all of these people, right? I mean, because there's a lot of trads who I know will say, I'm not going to vote. Trump's a Trojan horse. He's surrounding himself with right-wing oligarchs to trick the American people and others into getting on their side. We see this with Jeff Bezos recently, saying he wants more conservatives at the Washington Post, with
Mhm.
the owner of who else is saying similar things. I forget, but a lot of the Elon Musk, right? So Musk is just a big tech guy, and he's making deals with Trump to bring in the tech world, and Vance as well, with PayPal's Peter Thiel, right? To sort of moderate the Republican Party into a less socially conservative, less religious, less culture war organization. And that's all a very strong possibility, right? Um, anyone like Trump who gets to the position that he was at in his life and the friends he had, you're not going to get there without buddying up to the system. But I think look at the policies that he's promoted in recent weeks and his messaging in recent weeks. He realizes, at least he's saying, immigration, mass immigration, illegal immigration needs a change, right? Deportations. Now, is he going to do that? I don't know. I mean, let's hope he does. Let's hope he also greatly restricts legal immigration, right? Because that's just slow transformation of the country through another means. Um, I I look at, again, the dichotomy with the Harris campaign, right? She's actively persecuted Knights of Columbus. She's been in the regime under Biden, going after Mark Houck, the pro-life Catholic father of seven, raiding his house. She just gifts the Al Smith dinner. So everything we know about Harris is blatantly anti-Catholic. She's domestically going to be awful, pro-censorship regime, everything. I don't think it's prudent to sit out this election. I understand people wanting Trump to be more hard line. I understand he supports and has said many bad things on abortion, and that he seems to be drifting and moving the party further in support of that. And he said at the state level, like he's wanting more states to be more pro openly abortion. My understanding, when I look at various moral theologians, is that if you can prevent a greater evil, then you generally should, right? And it might even be incumbent upon you to do that. I'll let the moral theologians answer all the specifics of that question, but it seems to me that there's a reasonable hope that if Trump gets in, there are many uh, uh, things that will be less lessened and than Harris. Um, Now, again, that's not a guarantee. Has made various allies in the Middle East that are in Israel. Netanyahu seems to be mending fences with him. Will Trump get in, and then Netanyahu starts bombing other countries in the region? And will Trump then, go along with that? It's very possible. I hope not. He seems to be making and getting endorsements from various Muslim voters who seem to be of the opinion that he's going to be a pro-peace candidate. So, I think, I guess I've already voted in this election. And I again, what Catholics really need to do if they want to change the system is, yes, to reject ultimately this idea that we can just continue to keep voting for the lesser of two evils. Um, if we were in a situation where it was possible, and it might be possible, I'm not sure, but the two-system parties, the two-party system has a stranglehold on our country. We can't, at the moment, do much better. I mean, in theory, we should be having our own Catholic Party, and Catholics should be voting for each other, and we break up the Republican-Democrat system and have a party where we actually have our voice heard instead of playing for peanuts at the big kids table, right? So I think there is a prudential reason to say, yes, I will vote in this election. But again, to do so, not for, again, Trump's blatant support for many, many bad things. We can't be complicit in that. When it comes to moral theology, we have to know in our mind, hey, we're voting to prevent a greater evil, and we're hoping that will be the case. So I do encourage, if you ask my full opinion, others to do that and to see what happens. And obviously, last comment here, Mari, is to pray and fast, because voting is not going to get us out of this mess at all. It's not. We need supernatural divine intervention. We need the outpouring of grace in this country. We need to roll back the four sins that cry to heaven for vengeance in this country and world. Because until that happens, God's going to be totally justified to give us candidates like the Democrat candidate in this election, which is probably what we deserve, right? But I think I've said enough on that, and it's a very delicate question. But I know others are going to have different opinions, but I think that's for now. I think it's a fair thing to do.
But this really, her closing message has completely eliminated any issues, anything about what she do. I mean, essentially, her closing message has turned into Trump is horrible. Trump's unhinged. Trump is a fascist, and nothing positive. I mean, she sort of dropped the pretense that she even had of actually standing for something. Essentially, her message is, I'm not Donald Trump. Um, Trump has actually ended pretty strongly. I'll pick up where you were with the major story about this comment of Joe Biden about garbage. Trump seized on this, I think, pretty effectively just yesterday. And he went to Wisconsin, a very important state, and he, instead of riding in a limousine, he was at the airport. He left in a garbage truck, dressed in a vest like a garbage man. I'll play this little video.
Comment made by really both of them, because there are really two of them, about being garbage, maybe 250 million people. They shouldn't be talking. That's like deplorable for Hillary. This is the deplorable for Hillary.
The deplorable for Hillary. And that was a major comment in 2016 that drove a lot of undecideds away from Hillary, that she just dismissed the people who'd vote for him as a basket of deplorables. So he went to a rally in Wisconsin. He kept the orange vest on and he said, I'm here to collect the garbage. Are you ready to go? And he just had, really turn this to his advantage, I think. In the only way he can do, just like he went to McDonald's last week and worked in McDonald's meeting people, because Harris claimed to work for McDonald's when she was in college, a claim that McDonald's says they cannot verify. He sort of then went and showed up there. So he's really a master showman. I mean, you have to give him credit, and he's really sort of driving home. Look, that's what these people think of you. These people think of you as deplorable garbage. Um, and I want to be, he said, his message, president for all people. So while she's sort of narrowing her focus, he's trying to become broader in these final days. And he's done that with religious groups in particular. You mentioned religious exemptions. He's taken sort of the opposite view of Harris. He's strongly spoken about in recent days exemptions for religious groups, an expansion of exemptions, and even under one of the controversial things, he's got involved in IVF. He's pushed IVF, but he now says, look, if you're a religious hospital or institution, or you have a religious exemption, if you object to it, you don't have to have anything to do with it. So I think he's, again, realizing maybe he needed to broaden and reach out and reassure different groups. So he's really finishing strongly. He's appeared on a lot of forums. One that's gotten a lot of attention is Joe Rogan, obviously not a Republican, not really a conservative, but very popular podcast. He was on for almost 3 hours. I have to admit, I've not watched the whole thing. I watched some of it, but it's amazing. This guy can talk for 3 hours. But the parts I watched were very human. He tells the story about Joe Rogan's asking, what was it like when you first walked into the White House? And he tells a really, kind of very human story about what he said. I want to see the Lincoln bedroom. I've never been here before. And how he was so impressed with it, his impressions, and how overwhelming it was. He's very humble. He admits that one of the major things a president has to do is appoint about 10,000 people directly or indirectly. And he got some of those wrong. He really appointed people that shouldn't have been there, and he's learned his lessons. I think that was a very humble way to end, saying, I'll be, learned from my first term. He is all over Pennsylvania. I mean, he is everywhere. He appeared right near St. Charles Borromeo School and church where I grew up, the grammar school I went to, which is, by the way, now closed because of the springtime of Vatican II. They had no children in the school and it shut down. But he was just there. I noticed just the other day in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. He's really going into the final days with a lot of energy. He also, it was interesting in the Joe Rogan interview. He asked him, well, okay, if there were problems with the 2020 election, right? There were things that went on. What are you doing this time? And it's interesting. He's like, don't worry about it. But he didn't give a lot of specifics. And thinking about it, I think it was sort of like when they say, what are you going to do about the war in Ukraine if you get in? He says, I'll deal with it. I have a plan, but he doesn't tell you because he says, I can't tell you because then Putin will know. I almost wonder if he has people on the ground that are going to fight on Tuesday against corruption or cheating, but he doesn't want to really reveal how. That was the sense I got in that Joe Rogan interview, but that he's aware of the issue and is more aware than he was in 2020. Finally, we got a really good October surprise from the Supreme Court. Although, as I'll tell you at the end, I don't think it was all a surprise in how they ruled. So Virginia started in August going through a process of taking people off the voting registers who were apparently fraudulently on there because they're not citizens. They were registered to vote, but they're not American citizens. And they went through a case-by-case process, connecting with the Department of Motor Vehicles to get their citizenship information. Then the individual is notified, you appear not to be a citizen. If you give 2 weeks, if you can prove to us you're actually a citizen, we'll put you back. Otherwise, you're taken off. And there were, almost 2,000 people that they had removed from the register. The lower federal district court and the Court of Appeals ordered them to put all the people that they found were non-citizens back on the ballot. So literally on the ballot, on the red roll of voters, literally ordering them to let non-citizens vote. So they appealed to the Supreme Court on its emergency docket. 6 of the justices agreed. No opinion was issued. It was done as an emergency basis, but issued an injunction against the lower court ruling and said Virginia does not have to put these people back. So that is, I think, a good for Virginia because there are several thousand people who should not have been voting who were able to walk in if this had not been done by the Supreme Court. Now, the arguments I want to give you, the liberals will say this is horrible. There's a federal statute on voting access that says you're not allowed to make sweeping changes to the voter rolls within 90 days of the election. You can individually, case by case, change people if you find out or have proof they're not eligible to vote, they're dead, they've moved, etc. But you can't just do a whole mass, we're just throwing all these people off because it's too close to the election and people won't have time to deal with it. And Virginia's argument all along is that's not what we were doing. This is case by case. Each person gets individualized notice, they can respond, and we put them back on. And the Supreme Court essentially agreed with that and said, yes, you are not violating federal law, and allowed them to go forward. So I think that is an example of what I think Trump's people, supporters, have been doing in various states. Youngkin, the governor, by executive order, ordered this. I think things like that have been going on in states where trying to get some of this voter corruption under control. And for example, non-citizens. So I think that was a good October surprise coming this week for Trump. And we will see. It's going to be a nail biter. Oh, I did say why I don't think it was so much a surprise. I think what we've learned from the Supreme Court's jurisprudence since 2020 on elections is they essentially say court shouldn't be involved. They refuse to take every case that Donald Trump brought and that the state of Texas brought and all parties brought about the 2020 election. They just said, monkey see, don't see, don't see here. We're not having to do with it. And I think essentially that explains this decision. They just said the court shouldn't have been involved. Virginia did what it did. It's up to Virginia to decide who can vote. It's up to the states to run elections. We have nothing to say about it. Chief Justice John Roberts really regrets, I think, his Bush v. Gore decision in 2000 that resolved the 2000 election. And they, decided by their ruling that Bush would win. Essentially said, I don't want anything to do with elections anymore. And he's convinced the rest of the court, I think, to go along with him. So although it's a good thing for Trump, I think this, don't get too excited. Oh, the Supreme Court's going to help. I think this is consistent with what they've been doing, saying courts shouldn't tell states what to do. States can do whatever they want. 2020, that was crazy mail-in ballots with no verification arriving after election day. This happened to be a good thing, but I think they are consistent in that one thread. So that's my roundup on the Trump side. My prediction, I think Trump is going to win the vote, the electoral votes. I think it actually has a high likelihood to be even surprising. I think they're all focused on the 7 battleground states. My prediction is I think there's going to be a couple surprising states that that are right now, if you look at maps, are like light blue or blue, that they think will be Democrat, that will flip over. Maybe New Hampshire, maybe Virginia, but I think there's going to be a couple surprises that are going to go into his total, is my prediction. Now, what happens after Election Day, a whole other story. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But I predict he's going to win the popular vote, I think. And I think he's going to have over 270 with maybe a surprising collection of states to get there.
Yeah, I want to point out one last thing because it is very interesting. I think the Trump campaign agrees with you. They have some interesting data because today, for example, he was in New Mexico. New Mexico is one of those lighter blue states, and nobody's projecting for him to win that. It's on the same line as Virginia or Minnesota, but I think they think that they could have a really good day on election day. And maybe as a final note, if there's a lot of traditional Catholics who are absolutely not. We're never going to vote for Trump. Maybe not a majority, but it's certainly there are some.
Yeah.
And I will just stress that there are some things you definitely should go vote for anyways. Many of these states have abortion just
Yes.
directly on the ballot. For example, here in Arizona, there was one certain proposition that would make abortion up till birth just completely legal. That's a yes or no vote. So I would still highly suggest to everyone, even if you're not on board with the Trump campaign, there are still propositions that deserve your attention and that you should still consider going to vote. I think that's part of our civic duty to go and vote on those propositions. But as you said, this is going to be a nail biter no matter what. But I still, at the end of the day, think it will be a decisive victory, but it will require people going out and voting.
Yes, and very important. Even if you're not going to vote in the presidential election, those ballot measures may be even more important for the long-term future. In Florida, there's 2 constitutional amendments that are incredibly important. Proposition 4, which makes it a constitutional right for abortion up to birth, so that all the laws against abortion that have been adopted in Florida would be wiped out. You must vote no on that one. And Proposition 3, which I think they put on the ballot to get people out to vote for 4, to legalize marijuana. Honestly, it was the ploy. Oh, yeah, I'll go vote for marijuana. And the people that are likely to vote for that probably in favor of abortion. But that will ruin the state, allowing I've seen it in other states. So vote no on those. And one final note, your congressman and senator really matter. I alluded to after the election, I do not put them some shenanigans in the Congress on certifying the election. If the Democrats get control, they will have an insurrection. So it's really important that he has a solid majority in the Congress to prevent them from doing something there.